Listen, the other thing you know me on is that and next week we've got the Minister of Broadcasting, Paul Goldsmith, on the show next Thursday, I think, to interview on the level of support and on the issues that confront our state broadcaster, Television New Zealand and Radio New Zealand. But this week you may not have caught up with the fact that Radio New Zealand's radio audience ratings has been released, and that they are the worst since the surveys began in terms of the number of people listening to Radio New Zealand, and it also has to be said their trust as well. Although they are regarded as the most trustworthy media organisation in New Zealand, only 50% of New Zealand said that, so they're at the top of a really bad bunch, and our trust ratings of the media in this country are amongst the worst in the Western world. But anyhow, there have been surveys, I think, going since 2020, so they haven't been doing them long. Radio New Zealand resisted them, and still do. Commercial radio has been doing surveys for, oh God, for as long as I've been alive, I think. They've been doing, it used to be twice a year. Now, for economic and fiscal reasons, they do it once a year. And so they've been doing these surveys, and Radio New Zealand has always resisted being included in them. First on the basis that it said, well, we're not a commercial radio station. Yes, but your listening audience would have been interesting. And second on the basis that they didn't want to be making comparisons. But they always had a very strong belief in themselves and in their product, that they were the most popular and listened to radio station in New Zealand. Well, in the end, somebody, and so it would have been 2020, would have been under a Labour government, decided to test that proposition for reasons, I guess, because you can only resist being monitored for so long. And so these surveys, annual surveys, have been undertaken at Radio New Zealand, which doesn't actually measure their performance against other radio stations, not taxpayer funded in this country, but just measures them against themselves. Okay, so many people, and so they use 2020 as their baseline. Well, since the first survey of 2020, which was, they then compared themselves. They didn't enter the same contest, but they then decided, after they got those results back in 2020, that they would compare themselves to commercial radio, and they compared themselves in 2020. This is only 5 years ago, with the then significant news rival, which was News Talk ZB. And they only did that because they worked out that they had 110,000 more listeners than Mike Hosking and all his ilk at News Talk ZB, based in Auckland. Well, now the latest survey shows that they have fallen again. This is only to November 2024, so God knows what it's like in May 2025. But 6 months ago, their latest survey shows that they are now not 110,000 listeners ahead of News Talk ZB. They are 180,000 listeners behind. Now, News Talk ZB haven't just suddenly dramatically shot up. They've stayed roughly where they've always been. But it does give you some indication of the dramatic fall-off of listeners at the national radio in particular. And in fact, where they once led the market in 2020, so this is in 2020, they're now based on a cumulative audience, in other words, the people who listen to them all the way during the day, they are now eighth. And that dramatic fall from 2020, the first survey, till this most recent survey was done 6 months ago, November 2024, has taken them from first to eighth. Now, in his remarks, I think I saw yesterday, the broadcasting minister, and we'll get him to expand on that, one of the things he did say, Paul Goldsmith, was it is time for Radio New Zealand to regain the trust of the New Zealand public. And given the, $60-odd million a year annual funding that goes to that organisation. But on the basis of something really simple, who's listening, there has never been it would appear in the history of broadcasting in this country such a dramatic plummeting of listener numbers and, by definition, public trust. And as a consequence of that, people are now fleeing Radio New Zealand to come and listen to a variety of other sources of news, information, comment, entertainment, including ourselves, obviously the platform. Now, but here's the issue. None of those other commercial radio stations, outlets like the platform, new alternative forms of media expression, rely upon being state-funded. And Radio New Zealand is 100% state-funded. They've got a budget of $62 million, I think, this financial year. There's 370 full-time staff working. 300, and I know, you're asking yourself the question, what do they do? In addition to which, you have to say, there are no conservative voices on Radio New Zealand. So if, as the Minister of Broadcasting Goldsmith charged this week, that they need to be representative of New Zealand, what he really meant, I will assume, is that it's about time you had voices that are representative of all New Zealanders. Now, the other interesting thing about Radio New Zealand is it's got its own Maori broadcasting, news gathering, news service. It's called Te Ao Māori. If you go on the website, you can see it for yourself. It's essentially, at the end of the day, an anti-government propaganda device, Te Ao Māori. If you have a look at the stories, and if you know, I don't want to send you there now, but when you're just browsing over a long weekend and thinking, oh, Michael Laws, he said, go and have a look at the Radio News website. Go and have a look at Te Ao Māori. Go and find any story that comes out of the Māori section of Te Ao Māori from Radio New Zealand that has anything other than the most critical, condemnatory view of the government and its policies. There isn't one. It is a moan. I think I'll moan some more. Now I'm going to moan. I've stopped moaning now. No, I'm back to it. It's and all of that propaganda aimed at the Maori audience of Radio New Zealand is designed to denigrate the government, its ministers, its policies on a daily, I kid you not, daily basis. It's not just that there are no conservative voices on the state broadcaster representing all New Zealand, and given the majority of adult New Zealanders in actual fact voted and still, according to the news polls, support this coalition government made up of National, an ACT, and New Zealand First, but there are no voices representative of those people who voted for them or those stances or viewpoints at all. Exactly the opposite. And then when you go to the Te Ao Māori section, it's just a propaganda outlet for Te Pāti Māori. I kid you not. So all I'm just saying is, and I'll say it again, and I'll continue to beat this drum, Radio New Zealand is losing listeners. It's lost trust. It is captured by the woke and by the left and the liberals and the radicals of this country. They are not us. They do not represent us. They take our money to commit a political crime on an almost daily basis. Not on the basis that there shouldn't be those views and that they shouldn't be represented on Radio New Zealand, but they are the only views that are represented on Radio New Zealand, and the centre and the centre-right of New Zealand, the conservative voices of our community that make up, still according to the latest polls, the majority of adults in this country are not represented at all. And yet it's our money that pays for them. So those are the overall ratings. The breakfast ratings are dreadful there. The trust levels ratings, well, they say they're trusted, but gosh, to be honest with you, when half, according to the latest survey, of people don't trust you, I would hardly be parading the fact that half of New Zealand does as a news media source.